Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 190 with my guest, Abby Savell. Abby is one of the co-owners and founders of LA Percussion Rentals with her husband, Dan Savell, who was on the podcast about a year ago. It was nice to get to catch up with Abby. I'd only really known her through Facebook and other social media outlets. And she reached out to me to chat when I put sort of an open call on Facebook about chatting on the podcast. So I really enjoyed getting to chat with Abby and getting to know her background a little bit better. We talk about things like, what it's like to run a business during COVID and gender disparity in the field and all of that sort of stuff. And so, again, enjoyed this conversation. Hope you do as well. Without further ado, this is Abby Savell. Take care. Bye. Fantastic. All right. Abby Savell.
I have a pen here too.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about all that, but let's gavel this to order. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right, we are on the record, Abby.
Okay.
And do you go by Abby or Abigail? What do you prefer?
Abby.
Abby. Okay, great. Well,
Yep.
I've done a podcast with your husband Dan, and
Yep.
I met Dan through LA Percussion Rentals. Did you found it with him?
Yeah.
So, but you're someone who when did we first meet in person?
Maybe when you came and visited, and I feel like it was maybe the time you guys were playing on the Marimba Eroica, but I'm not totally sure.
Okay. All right. Well, in my life, I run across Dan more than I run across you in person, and for whatever reason, that's the case.
Yeah.
But I reached out on Facebook a couple weeks ago and was like, "Who wants to talk?" And I appreciate that. I'm always curious when not suspicious. I'm curious of people who respond are like, "I want to talk." Like, and I like that because I feel like I don't have to beg somebody. Like, I just know the conversation's going to be easier than with me begging somebody to talk. So, I'm curious. Just before we get into you as a person, what did you want to talk about? What prompted you to reach out? Aside from,
it's all good. Like, first of all, I may be really difficult to talk to, so don't count your chickens before they hatch. I think you've challenged me. I work a lot in the background. Mm-hmm. So which is probably why you didn't really know me before. I kind of like working in the background. Mm-hmm. I'm not a person that actually I'm not a person. I'm like the total cross between an introvert and an extrovert. There are times where I absolutely want to be by myself and I don't want to talk to anyone at all. Mm-hmm. I need that time. Actually, I've realized it more as I've gotten older, how much I needed that time. Like when I was a kid, I always had my own bedroom, and like I realized that that's kind of like that's definitely part of my personality. But I think that as time has gone on, I have been in the background a lot, but I think also that I get kind of tired of always talking to people online and social media and typing stuff all the time. And so I think that like with everything and all the changes that we've gone through in this last year, I think that I'm maybe a little more like willing to be social.
Well, I get like you sort of, I want to touch on something. You mentioned social media and just sort of like the desire not to type to people anymore.
Yeah.
I want to get like you are someone, and pardon me if I mischaracterize, so please tell me if I'm off base, but you're not afraid to get in the mix on a comment thread and voice your opinion. And I'm afraid. Mm-hmm. I'm terrified of comment threads. And so anyway, I want to talk to you about that because I'm envious of you. I'm jealous, and I want to learn how to be braver in those spaces. But before we get into
there are plenty of times I actually don't say stuff. Let me just say that. I actually have a filter, but yes, thank you.
I didn't want to imply that you didn't have a filter. I want to get to know, like, I really actually only know you through Facebook, and I feel like this is someone who knows what she stands for and isn't afraid to say it. So, okay. Cool. I know that much, so we'll go from there. But before we get into any of that messy stuff, can you just go back to like baby Abby and like what got you into percussion, and then how did you get into basically doing what you're doing today? And I know that's a pretty broad question, but start where you start. And we'll go from there.
I'll give you the shorter version because I don't want to spend the whole like hour on that. Do we have an hour? I don't even know.
Okay, hour's fine. Whatever. We're loose.
Well, I'm sure everyone doesn't want to hear exactly, all the details about why, but.
Well, you know what? This isn't up to them. It's up to me and you. So I don't care what they
Okay.
think.
They can always scrub forward. So there you go.
Yeah, totally.
My parents characterized me as a pretty wacky kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember finding a lot of humor in things, and I was always a kid that was into slapstick. So,
just so we're clear, like slapstick as a form of humor, like that's a genre of the humor.
Physical comedy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I made my dad used to go to the video rental spot like on Fridays, and I made him rent Three Amigos at least 15 times.
What did your parents do for a living?
My mom is a primary care physician, so she's an internist, and my dad he's still alive. I made it sound like he died. He works for the government. He actually works for the federal government. He actually was first in hospital administration, and then he got a job in hospital administration that moved us out to California from Chicago when I was 9. And they were kind of looking to move anyway because they were kind of isolated in Chicago, and they were getting really tired of dealing with the weather and stuff like that.
That's where you were born. You were born in Chicago.
I was born in Wisconsin. Actually, I was born in Madison. I lived there till I was 2.
Okay. And
then moved to Chicago, and then lived there till I was 9, and then moved out to California. I remember Chicago very well. I loved it. So, and I feel like it totally molded me partially into the person I am now.
Why do you say that?
So, desiring to have a yard, where I live, a lot of LA, people have these little tiny yards. Like, unless you basically bought your house in, let's just say maybe the 90s and earlier, you really can't afford any real yard here. And so I've always desired to have some space, some outdoor space. We had a gigantic front yard. My parents weren't like well off or anything, but it was just like part of the deal. You had like this huge front yard that's big and flat. We had a huge ginkgo tree in the front. We had a pretty good sized backyard. I spent a ton of time outdoors. I rolled logs over and picked up bugs. Like, it was my deal. Like, I collected bugs. I used to stand on my driveway because we had one of those, for us in California, or like in LA, at least this isn't actually normal. For you, maybe it's more normal, but we had a detached garage with a really long driveway that went back there. And I used to stand in the driveway, and I would freeze. And the monarch butterflies, for some reason, had this pathway that would go basically down my driveway and over the garage, and I would freeze, and they would come land on me. And I thought that was like the most magical thing ever, like a whole bunch at one time. I thought that was the most magical thing ever. And this whole thing about being outdoors really impacted me as I grew up. And it's still something I like really desire, is to be outdoors more, but I'm finding it really difficult to get outside for a bunch of different reasons. And I don't really want to move right now either. Like, it's not really a good time to be doing that. So, what was I saying?
Well,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, I was curious, like the move. I'm always curious about people who move too, because I never did. I mean, I stayed. My parents. I'm from Ohio, a very small town called Dover. Grew up in a cornfield, so everything I didn't play with bugs so much, but I was in the Boy Scouts. I did all those things, but I never moved anywhere, and so like that part of my psyche, like Adam Slowinski, he moved all over the place when he was a kid, and so. I'm curious for you, like, what are some things, other than your appreciation for cold weather clothing, what was it about moving to California, or moving Wisconsin to Chicago to California, that you feel like changed the way you maybe see things? Like, or the way things maybe someone who grew up in California without seeing any of those things might see things differently? Is there anything with you that you noticed along those lines?
Well, there's things out here that if you grew up in Southern California, and I said Southern California versus Northern California because the climate is a bit different here. It's much warmer overall. It's much less foggy overall. But there's just these things you take for granted out here. Like when we moved, my mom was like, your school is going to be outside. And I was just kind of dumbfounded by that whole idea.
I'm still dumbfounded by it, and I know it exists. I've been to them, you know.
Yeah, there are no basements here. I mean, pretty much no basements in houses, at least. I think I picked up the like habit, the like, which I do all the time. I actually remember picking up the habit.
But that's I mean, those sorts of things that's really common. I mean, if I'm in Trinidad for 2 weeks, there's parts of like, it's subtle, but it's like, instead of saying good evening, it's good night, is the way, you know, the Caribbean community greets each other. And it's like, good night. And I come back to the States and I'll say good night. And somebody's like, that's a turn. That's like when you say goodbye, you're like, good night, you know. In Trinidad, good night is a hello, you know, welcome. And so I find myself slipping into those sort of, that jargon if I'm in a place. So I can imagine living in Trinidad, if I lived there for years, what I would sound like to my mom, you know, coming home.
Yeah, it's weird because I've visited wherever Canada, and I find myself with some of their little things too. Of course, the A, and you know, even just visiting the Southwest, or the South, I should say. You know, visiting Texas and things like that. When we went to PASIC or whatever, it's pretty funny. You know, you kind of, I guess you're still moldable at my age, right? Our ages.
I hope so.
We're probably around the same age. I don't know.
I'm 41.
Okay, yeah. I'm a little tiny bit younger than you, but.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 40.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. So we're the same. We're Generation Y or whatever that we're, right? We're Generation Z, Gen Z, Gen X.
Zennial.
We're Gen X. Yeah.
We're in the Zennial. You've never read the Zennial? The whole thing about Zennials?
No.
Or like the combo of Gen X and Gen X and Millennial, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying real hard not to, like, I hate those categories because I'm like, yeah, I can hate the boomers all I want, but you know what house I slept in from years 1 to 18? A boomer's house. Like there's only so far I can really hold my ideological line before it falls apart, you know. We're all in this together. We're all responsible for how things move forward in one way or another, and whatever I'm horrified to know what people in like 50 years are going to be looking at Gen Z and be like, did you guys even realize that you killed off every penguin? I'm like, no, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Like, we were just trying to live stream. We didn't realize it was going to kill off all the penguins, you know. You know, whatever I mean, you know, but in 1985, people weren't, you know, we're making decisions about hairspray and things, and it's like, nobody in that moment is like, you know, you might deplete the ozone layer and there's gonna be a massive wave of melanoma.
Yeah.
Like that's not the thought process.
You probably remember, we were pretty young in 85, but I do remember there was talk about, there was Earth Day, but I feel like it wasn't something that was lived. It wasn't lived, and it wasn't like part of the mainstream culture.
Yeah.
And there certainly weren't a lot of choices to make otherwise, you know? It was an ideal, but now I feel like it's more like, well, yeah, if you just throw trash out of your car, someone's probably actually gonna scream at you, you know? Right.
There's a different vibe now.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I derailed us. So your father picks up movies on Friday nights, and I'm curious, like where in this time period did you get involved? Like, so we have slapstick humor in the mix, and you're watching Three Amigos. Like, when did you start to feel like being involved in music as like a jobby job was something you really wanted to do?
Right. So super fast forward, I played piano from the age of 6. My grandma bought us a piano, started piano, did that for a number of years, liked it, didn't love it. Like, I liked music, I think, more than piano, right? It wasn't very good. My hands are really small, first of all. I'm not trying to, well, okay, here's my excuse. My hands are really small, and my fingers are actually relatively short. And I just I love the music, and I love playing music, and I love listening to music, but the piano thing was more of like, it's kind of like a gateway, but it certainly wasn't the be all end all for me. And then I kind of always had this idea that I either wanted to play like sax, and I always had this fascination with xylophone, but I never really knew why. So anyway, I played violin actually for a second also on the way, which I just hated. It was just a terrible instrument for me. So I played that in 4th grade for like 6 months, but I kept going with piano this whole time. Then we're signing up for high school, like all the different, you know, classes and everything. And we're sitting at the kitchen table, and my mom is looking at the schedule with me, and she says, she says, "Oh, hey, look, if you sign up for PE, you can, or if you, I'm sorry, I totally blew that. If you sign up for band, you can get out of PE." So I was like, sweet, because I hated PE. Mm-hmm. And she said, I said, "Well, what instrument am I going to play?" And she said, because I was playing piano, and I'm like, "They're not going to have piano in band." And she said, "Well, you know, xylophones are like basically a giant piano." And I was like, okay. And so that was kind of that. I mean, I joined, and my high school was really competitive. Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly how competitive they are nowadays. Mm-hmm. I know all the staff is completely different now, mm-hmm. but I went to Mission Viejo High School because I was in Orange County, and it was very competitive. It was basically like DCI.
Yeah, so. Did you march drum corps at all? Like when you through
no.
your okay? Because
after the experience there, it was already so intense. I was like, okay, I think that was cool, and I learned how to become like really, you know, all the stuff, the sport part of playing, right? But I was like, I don't need any more of this side of things. I totally realized what I got out of it and everything, but I kind of didn't really feel like I needed to keep going down that path. So
sometimes as performer, like I think about this as a you know, at 41, and I have, you know, 10 to 15 years worth of students behind me. Like, what are the things I'm telling them that are important, and what are the things that actually aren't? And sometimes you're taught, whether it be through, you know, you see something on YouTube, or you're part of a drum corps that has a specific, or you're in a particular steel band that relies on whatever, like the amount you actually need the party trick in life. It's like, actually, nope, you just need, turns out that Soviet era train with 4 moving parts, totally fine. like that's all you need. Like the fundamentals and the basics are what you need. Like being able to do a 4 mallet, like in every permutation. It's like, that's awesome. It's not bad.
Yeah.
But the times when you might like be in terms of evolution as a musician, I feel like I was like, okay, there's some things. I grew this appendage in grad school. I don't need that anymore. Like, I have no need to play Roga Shanti in my life.
Yes.
And and so it's just interesting, like, what are the things, you know, you're being told a certain thing about your studies coming up in the place you were. Like, what is your responsibility as a teacher now? And like, anyway, just interesting stuff to think about.
Yes. I mean, and for me also, I want to add that I had a lightning bolt moment where I decided that I had to do this as a career.
That? Why?
And it was when it was in October of 96. So I think I must have been I must have just started my junior year. And we went and saw the musical. I believe it was at the Pantages. We went and saw Beauty and the Beast. And all of those textures and everything, it was like, I have to do this. There was no other choice. It was boom. I went down and I looked at the orchestra pit, you know, from above. I didn't try to get down there or anything. And it was just like, this is where I belong, is in this section. And there's no question. I had been wrangling a little bit with like, oh, do I want to go into, you know, medicine, or do I want to go into music? And it was something I'd been wrangling with. For some reason, I felt like I had to wrangle with this at age like 16, like overly responsible all the time.
No, but you're not saying
like I had to make a decision.
You're not saying anything that's, I mean, that doesn't sound crazy to me. I mean, I remember being 16 years old and feeling like I had to make a call. And then I remember being 19 years old and feeling like I had to make a call. I remember being 35 years old and feeling like I had to make a call. And now I'm 41 and I still feel like I have to make a call. Like, truth is, you don't have to make a call. You just got to make sure that what you're doing every day is the thing you want to be doing, and that's the call you got to make. I mean, were your parents supportive of you?
I was lucky because they were supportive of me. Because I think you and I probably both know a bunch of people whose parents said, you know, no, you're not doing that. They either say you're not doing that, or they say you're gonna go into one of these like 3 fields. And I know a number of people like that too. And I mean, frankly, most people didn't really say anything to me about it. Like, I know we like to always pick out all the people who are jerky about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've played like plenty of gigs where there are, there's someone who acts like a jerk there, or they're drunk, or they act wild and crazy. They say something inappropriate. But I've also played 10 times the amount of gigs where it was totally cool. So, there were a couple of instances where I remember like one of the other parents in band or something had said something to my dad about, well, that's not really a career or something. And my dad said to me, I don't know if you heard that, but just ignore that. And I said, what? And then he repeated it to me. And I said, I don't care, whatever. Mm-hmm. Nowadays I might be like, oh yeah, well, blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you about all the places arts exist in real life. And I would get into a whole thing trying to make this person realize how essential and how integrated arts are into every single thing you do all day long. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned on a Facebook post actually a while ago, there's all these alloys of arts. Person who designed your knives, they were not just like an engineer or scientist. There was literally like art involved in that. Mm-hmm. There's all these alloys of arts. And so I really feel like one of the things, and I'm totally on a tangent, so I'll make this quick, but I feel like one of the things that our arts community needs to do is actually educate the public better about like how we integrate into their lives. That there is, of course, the abstract component where, you maybe, there's like this weird installation somewhere, right? You go into the park and there's this weird installation. You're like, we just spent how much money on that? Like, I don't care. Like, I'm happy about stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But then there's all this integration into regular life that arts have. And there's been a lot of that actually brought up during this pandemic with people like, going and watching Netflix and doing paint by number and all of these things that people are doing. And like, that's arts. Like this is like one of your goals is to have like your free time as a human being doing arts or watching arts, in some way. So like I was saying, back then I was like, whatever, I don't care. And now I'm kind of like, excuse me, let me educate you a little bit.
Well, the thing that was, just in full disclosure, like my constant honesty moment with you is like when the pandemic first hit and it was clear that we were going to be locked down for longer than 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Like there was the Gal Gadot Imagine sort of collab that came out where it was like everybody was like, imagine all the people, and it's like the first sort of like collab remote thing happened. It's terrible, everybody's off key, and then all of a sudden there was this huge push of like, artists, we need you now more than ever. And I was like, no. Nope. Like I'm just like, no. You know what? For when the times are good, I'm begging people for scraps to come to shows, to come to steel band concerts, whatever. Now we're all locked inside, and our Netflix account is maxed out, and you've watched everything there, and now you want me to dance for you some more for free, and it's gonna be twice the amount of work than it is just to go to a concert. Yep. Like, no. Like I was just like over here, like no, you don't get this. I eventually came out of that irrational sort of reaction to people because I understand why people feel that way. But it's interesting as an artist, I get it, to think about that and like how do you have? This is, as you were talking, I was thinking like it's pretty. You have to. It's all in the cell and how you convince. I loved the idea that that timpanist from the beer commercial on the Super Bowl put his feet on the thing. I saw people blow up, and I saw that, and I saw the sort of conversation around it with Dan and you, and I was like, you know what? It's actually really good that I don't think most percussion students studying in the U.S. right now know that that there was a reason there was covers on those timpani. And it's because there's a person like you or Dan in the room who rented those timpani. Mm-hmm. And by the way, they're the same timpani you probably rented to us when we played George Crumb's music there a couple years ago. Like, probably this stuff is all like, there's a person there. There's not some monster making this decision of like degrading the timpani. It's like, do you want the world to know about timpani or not? Yeah. Do you want to know the world to know that the Super Bowl, like the Super Bowl has to interface with the economy, the same one that the LA Phil has to interface with. And you are involved in that too. And like, anyway, it's just, I think I was shocked at how few people, I was just like, you guys didn't know that the NFL doesn't own timpani? What the fuck's wrong with you people? Like, of course they're renting it from Dan, like, of course. Yeah. But that's the sort of thing. It's like, it's obvious to me, But I don't think it's obvious to most percussionists that every time a major orchestra plays a show, that some of that percussion equipment on the stage, some of the gear is rented.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would be interesting for places to know that most orchestras don't own a cymbalum. They don't own a really nice celeste. They don't own Stokowski chimes. Like those aren't things that they have in their closet. They just pull out. You know, you're part of that economy. And I'm curious, when the shutdown happened, like, what's been the biggest change for you and Dan in terms of like how the business model changes, and like how have you had to adapt to that directly?
Oh my gosh.
I'm asking it because it seems like the most obvious question in the world. When Broadway shows shut down, I imagine Carols and Kettles and all the companies in New York are like, there went 90% of our income. Like, how the hell do we deal with this? Like, what for you and Dan? How'd you deal with that? And feel free to be warts and all about that.
Yeah. It's a very, very dichotomous thing for us. Okay, so on the financial plane, you know, we did okay. We also have lost a gigantic part of our income. Mm-hmm. And also we were musicians playing gigs too, right? So we really lost a giant part of our income. Basically, without getting into like a serious, like, long thing about the financial part, essentially we've been able to survive because we've been able to patch together a little bit of savings with a trickle of stuff still coming in. Mm-hmm. Okay. And like PPP, like some of the governmental small business stuff. Mm-hmm. And then also actually a handful of small grants, music grants. Our local union gave us a small grant. Our city had a grant it was like an extension of the larger federal grant they were actually able to give to some of the small businesses in the area. I've applied probably for 40 or 50 different grants. Mm-hmm. And we've received, like I said, like maybe a half a dozen of them. Also going through and just like we just had to get rid of a bunch of expenses. And then frankly, when you're not really operating and you're kind of in hibernation, you have less expenses anyway, you know? Mm-hmm. So, and then we basically had to lay off like lay off or furlough like all of our employees. So that's that side. We were really dependent a lot on like a lot of the live music stuff, live music and touring. And see, the thing that's weird about it is that we were actually trying to move a little bit more into the space of, well, not like move, like separate, like and do something different, but we were trying to expand, I should say, into the space of, you know, doing more recorded mm-hmm. types of things and working with composers. And we were actually going there. We were going there anyway, but, you know, not developed enough to be able to like sustain us, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, essentially, we've been on the financial side, we've had to do like a whole bunch of patchwork to make that happen. You know, we also have 3 kids. So it's not as simple as like, well, I'm just going to go to work 12 hours a day, every single day and just somehow figure this out. It's been like a real dance of trying to figure out how to keep the infrastructure going, how to make things better in the interim in terms of making things better for now. But then when things kind of like reopen, making them better for the future. Like there's been a number of reorganizational things we've been like working on. There's been some actual progress we've been trying to work on that we didn't have time for before. I don't have like any real simple like line that I could just say where this is exactly how we did it, because I feel like we're still figuring it out, even though we're going on month 12 right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm not looking for an answer. I mean, everything you're saying is like right in line with what. So, I mean, there's a lot of things like, oh yeah, we don't spend money on travel when we don't have to travel. Like there are some upsides. You're like, whoa, that's crazy.
Like tempting. Maybe I just shouldn't do that anymore, so I don't have to have the expense, and I don't have to make the money to have the expense.
There is a tiny part of me that's like looking at the budget number and being like, we got to keep doing that. That's pretty great, you know. Like, but I imagine the hardest part of that, we have a small staff. We did not have to let anybody go, but I imagine that's the hardest part of all of this is looking at somebody who works for you and be like, you can't work for me anymore. And it's not really your fault or my fault. You know, like that sucks.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing when people are looking at, like, students are looking at you or they're looking at me and they're like, oh, I want to do what you're doing. It's like, are you sure?
Yeah.
You sure about that? Have you thought this through? What happens
Yeah.
if you have to fire your friend?
There's grunt work in there. It's not all glamorous. Doesn't mean that there aren't times when it can be really fun and really creative. Mm-hmm. It's been tough. Also, there's this balance. You're like, hey, I'm trying to make some sort of progress on something, yet I have no staff to really help me. I have no one to help me like reorganize this shelf. That's not just like, oh, I'm putting little boxes. Like you have to use like an order picker, you know, and we're having to move huge cases, and it's just like this. Everything is a huge deal when you don't really have any help, and then when you have 3 kids at home. So,
well, let me ask.
Look at my arm. My kid like went crazy on my arm with face paint today. So
I was gonna ask if that's like a new it looks like an arty tattoo as well. I thought like that's kind of rad.
Here's this side. Yeah.
I'm a big fan. I like it. You should just get that done as a tattoo. Just take your arms in and be like, just put this in print, please. Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, like, you know, one of the things you've mentioned a few things about, like, the word belonging has come up, and sort of how in your studies, like, trying to figure out where you, like, what niche you fit into. You know, I remember there was a guy at the University of Akron who was an alum. His name was Jack Butcher, and he opened not a rental place, but a, like, instrument repair place. Mm-hmm. And he always, everybody talked about him with this reverence, but it was sort of like, well, he does instrument repair. And I'm like, what? He kind of seems like one of the most important graduates from this entire place. Like why aren't we teaching, how are we teaching? Could you study music if your main passion, could you go get a music degree if your main passion was doing the things that Jack does? Like, I would venture to say he repairs instruments and looks at instruments the way he does because of the classical music studies he's had. And I would venture the way you and Dan look at instruments and the way you curate them, the way you conserve, the way you rent them out, all of those things are because you've spent time playing in an orchestra. You're not just like a random business person who's like, yeah, I'm going to start an instrument rental company. Right. And I know part of that belonging comes from representation in the field. Seeing this stuff happen, and I know in particular for you, I've seen you comment on things like gender, and I'm curious for you, like, coming into the field, what are some things that you noticed early on that were just like, whoa, we gotta deal with that, and then is there any progress? Are things getting any better, and how are we getting better, and how can we continue to do better in talking about this stuff? This is sort of going back to the initial sort of like, you're braver on Facebook than I am. Like, when I see people, like, I don't know, I'm just afraid to get into squabbling matches because I don't feel like they ever go anywhere on Facebook. But
yeah, I know.
You know, I want to stand up and defend and help people, but I just feel like it doesn't go anywhere. But anyway, sorry, you can answer the question.
No, it's all good. No, I mean, it's a cool topic. I mean, listen, I didn't realize a lot of this, if we're going to talk about just like gender right now, I didn't realize a lot of this gender stuff until I was later, until I was older, until it was later and I was older. There were some things when I look back at it where I'm like, you know, I think that maybe if I was a dude, I wouldn't have been treated that way. Like, for example, I was section leader when I was in high school, a pit. We had 18 people in the pit. It was gigantic. Like I said, it was like drum corps style, clean. Everything has to be clean. You know, we're getting, you know, it's this thing. It has to be clean. And it was miserable being section leader. Miserable. I don't know who thinks that they can give their friends push-ups and you're still going to be friends by the end of the semester. You know what I mean? If I could go back, I never would have taken that job. I was basically kind of like, it was kind of normal that I was just going to be the next one in line. I was already, like I said, I already decided I was going to be a musician by the time that came around. So it wasn't like it was me versus like 5 other people. And I was like, no, I really want to do. It was kind of just like this thing that happened. I would never have done that job again, ever. And I think that maybe there was some of that stuff in there where if I was a dude, maybe some of the stuff that had happened where maybe I was being intense would have been maybe portrayed a little bit differently if I was male. I don't know. I've had a number of incidences happen to me where I'm pretty sure it's because I am who I am. Mm-hmm. Let's just say it that way. Mm-hmm. And it probably wouldn't have happened to someone else, but there's no like proof. I'm not like, hey, let me sit down with you now and let's talk about all of this and let's see where this is coming from, right? So a lot of this, some of this stuff is just assumed that happens to, women or, of course, anyone, let's just say who's not in your like kind of stereotypical, because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people who are not stereotypical. So I'm just going to kind of use that as the characterization of all of that, right? And there's a lot of it that's kind of like assumed that that's what it is, where it's like, would you really do that to, someone who seems stereotypical? And then there's some things that actually are direct, where you're literally said, you're like told
there's
something. I've had probably a lot more of what I'm assuming is that than the actual direct things. I've had a number of direct things, but like I said, I probably had a lot more of the indirect.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's levels to the game, like there's, I've used this analogy in other things. It's like with racism, for example, it's like there's first degree murder.
Yeah.
And then there's second degree murder and third degree murder and then involuntary manslaughter and then a crime of passion. Like there's all, we've come up with labels for all of these different versions that end in someone dying, right? Because the context behind all of them are way different. You can pre-plan a murder and conspire with somebody over time. That's a different thing than hitting someone with your car by accident because you fell asleep at the wheel. Like,
right.
And I think in these instances, like, I'm really curious about sort of drilling down on them and trying to figure. Like, I know for me, like, I've been thinking a lot about. I grew up in a pretty male-dominated percussion section. I was taught by a woman. Her name is Joan Wenzel. She is one of my heroines in life. Heroines. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It's heroin.
She is one of my heroines in life and just a badass percussionist. I think there were like 2 or 3 girls in the section, but like I was the guy. I couldn't read pitches, and the flute player would always come up and read the bell parts for Sousa marches. And when I think like, I'm pretty sure in that moment, if the flute player was a guy, I would have been like, get up here. Like it wasn't a like gender thing. It was like, who can read music? Not me and not anybody else in our section. And so like when I think of those moments in my upbringing, there was definitely that. College, same deal. There was like 3 girls in the studio at the University of Akron when I was there. There were 2 at Yale. Out of the 5 students when I was there my first year, there were 2 out of the 5 were women. And that was like, again, it's like you get a little, when 2/3 or 2/5 of the group is one gender, it's like all of a sudden the balance, I don't want to say the balance of power, like there's some struggle inherent there anyway. I mean, Gwen Burgett and Ayano Katoka are like 2 of my favorite people in the world. Like there wasn't a fight, but all of a sudden you're like, oh,
yeah,
all right, I can't just be Josh Bro from Dover whenever I'm with like it's different. And Ayano's Japanese and Gwen's from it's like, oh, okay, cool, I have to learn about these other things now. And I don't know. It's just this sort of stuff is interesting for me to talk about, and I'm curious. The reason I want to talk to you about on social media is I feel I want to address my fear with you because I want you to help me. This is my podcast is just a therapy session for me, by the way. I hope you're okay.
No, it's all good. I love it. Well, I love it, and I love the concert honesty aspect, and we can get into that in a bit. But yes, I love it. Don't worry about it.
Kind of regardless of what the fight is on social media, no matter who's talking about what. Even if it's something I vehemently agree with, I very rarely will chime in the comment thread in support or deny of, or in support of, or an advocation against something. Mainly because I'm someone who, like, I think the thing I've learned about this pandemic is that I rely heavily on context and tone. It's like I've learned how to speak this particular language, and Facebook makes me speak Swahili a little bit in order to understand what's happening. And I don't, first of all, I like you a lot. I'll happily be like, hey, Abby, I think you're great. But you know who else I've just said I think you're great to? Your 3,000 other friends who are total strangers to me. And if one of them, for some reason, sees me in a Cleveland hat and is like, wait a minute, the Cleveland Indians need to change their logo. He's a racist. Like, all of a sudden, I've got like some... Anyway, That's my
Yeah.
anxiety. It's not completely
Yeah.
rational or founded, but I'm curious for you, how do you see the sort of, how do you interface with social media and how do you personally deal with that on a personal level? Or do you have those anxieties? Maybe I'm the only one and I just need to buck up.
Nah, like I said, I don't post everything. I think there's times I have to, have a like my own identity, and I can't get wrapped up into everything. There are times I've started to write something and I delete it. This happens plenty to me. More often than not now, I just don't say anything because I already know that I'm going to end up deleting it. And I'm not saying that I'm doing that because I'm saying something really awful, at least in my opinion. It's just because I can't be on social media all day. Yeah. And I also think that some people are too far gone, and social media is not going to be the thing that changes them. They need like an experience. They need, I'm a big advocate of, for example, okay, I'm going to maybe make some people angry right now, but because of a lot of the things I've been through, and I have this family of doctors, I'm a big advocate of a really high quality universal healthcare system set up. Mm-hmm. Notice how I said high quality universal healthcare. I didn't just say universal healthcare. There's no reason to do it if you're not going to make it good, and we're going to get some of these business people out of the mix. Okay.
I don't think you did make me angry with that. I grew up in a Rush Limbaugh household.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Rush. But I understand why people. I understand why people have the sort of like socialized medicine. No, but give me my Medicare. It's like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Like, I understand because I grew up in a house where that was being talked a lot about. So I'm just saying I agree with you, but I think it's how that stuff. When I said earlier about it's all in the pitch or all in the cell, like. Mm-hmm. How that stuff is communicated to a bunch of folks who have heard one thing is really, really crucial.
Right. I mean, this is a hairy topic. So, I mean, if I'm going to kind of just break it down without writing a 5 or 10 page essay right now, I'm going to break it down. I like pragmatism, right? I like solving problems, and I like having ideals about humanism, but it needs to include some pragmatism of like, how are we going to get there types of things. And I think that for the people who may be on the fence on social media, that stuff can be effective. I think, like I said, there are people who are going to need to have experiences of going back to healthcare, like going and, getting in a car accident and then having to be, intubated in the hospital with their other 4 family members and then owing $50,000. Because that's their, out-of-pocket maximum, who ended up in a hospital that was out of network, because this stuff happens. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
it happens a lot. And they're going to need the actual experience themselves to then decide that, this is something that's important to them. I try to have the perspective of, or I'm hoping that I don't have to have every single experience to have a perspective that is more humanistic. I'd like to believe people when they say that they are suffering in some way. And I'd like to help make that better for them. And I'm not saying that I'm the person that's going to show up at their door and make that better for them, but I would like to help the movement that helps make that suffering better for them. I see a lot of things in a systemic way where I'd rather deal with things upstream and deal with problems before they get really bad, instead of dealing with them much later when they're very hard to be reversed, very expensive to be reversed. They've done tons of damage with a huge ripple effect.
I just want to.
One of the ways. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted. There's 2 things. The thing you said about like you wanting to be a part of the conversation to help people feel supported, but then also I like that you said the word focusing on the upstream, like looking forward. Like one of the things that just bums me out and scares me a little bit is the amount of time that's spent on something that happened 10 years ago. Or, somebody said something. So now we've got to have a talk about whether or not this person should be part of this movement, whether they should have any say in anything. Like, hey, while we're all turned around looking backwards, there's weeds growing ahead of us, and we're going to have to cut them out, and that's going to take time too. And I'd far prefer to move this ball forward a foot over the course of my lifetime than to only push it an inch and have just spent all this time cleaning up all the mess behind me. Like, I understand there's inherent privilege in that worldview too. I also live in a world mostly where I get to live in the most usable part of society. I'm in the middle of the road. I'm just like, this is smooth. There's no potholes here. This is fucking great. I am aware that you know, that's not the case for everybody. But in general, I love that you sort of, your focus is on this sort of upstream mentality, because I think that's where the problems are. That's where the rocks are. That's where the deep, that's where the quicksand is ahead of us. And I'm not going to walk backwards. What's the point? You know?
Well, and that's why dealing with problems as on a social and psychological level is so important, because that is the upstream. Mm-hmm. Is social and psychological. When you're dealing things and you're trying to patch things up later after things are really jacked up, when you haven't, for example, because some people are probably like, what are you talking about? When you haven't given parents enough support, or you don't even, or we haven't offered parenting classes to anyone, or we haven't done after school activities, we haven't introduced kids to music or art or sports, and we just basically say whatever, they'll just figure it out on their own, you're going to pay for that later. So I think that dealing with things on that side is really important. And I think the psychological part is really important, because no matter what, there's always we're humans, and like our brains are in some ways extremely developed and in some ways extremely primal still. Yeah. And that part is super important to be dealing with. There just is not enough of that support out there. And that's really the upstream I'm talking about as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like these conversations are happening at places like NYU and Princeton, and so is having them in various ways. And mm-hmm. you know, I'm reminded, so did a gig in Ukraine. When I first joined the group, we were in Ukraine and in Kiev, or in Odessa. And one of the things about the town then was that there was a lot of construction going on in all these old buildings. And what they do, at least in Ukraine at that time, was they had a scrim that they would put up in front of the building that was the original image of the building. So it would look like there was just a screen in front. You would just like, oh, that's a picture of the building. And behind it was the building that was rotten and falling down. But that was like, we're just going to put a scrim up here. And I just feel like sometimes in these movements, I'm just like, are you just putting a scrim up? Like, cool. It's all this stuff. It's like, we changed the name of Aunt Jemima on the syrup thing. We changed names on buildings. Yeah. Like, that stuff is key. I don't think that stuff is unimportant symbolically. I think it is.
Right.
But
it's the easier stuff to do.
But that's just sort of like whoop, one hoist of the scrim up. Yeah. I'm like, okay, just keep doing that stuff, and eventually you'll have a scrim up that's like, look where we are.
Yeah.
Isn't this what you want? And you get inside and it's like, wait a minute, the building still has termites, and like you didn't fix any of the other stuff, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think, you know, well, a couple of things. I'm going to touch on one more thing I wanted to say. I love, in terms of reasoning with people, I love the logical fallacies. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, that big list of logical fallacies. I love those. That's the pragmatism that I love relying on, of like, if I'm going to make an argument, it's got to be from somewhere that's sound. You know, there's all these logical fallacies, and people don't know what I'm talking about. Look them up, because there's a whole bunch of them that's super interesting. And actually Wikipedia has the whole list of them with descriptions.
Well, this goes to the, like, when we were talking earlier about first and second degree murder or whatever, it's like, this is like, people often, I see this all the time in these logical fallacies. One of them is called a moral equivalency, where you, mm-hmm. where you make an argument, you see, an insurrectionist beating a cop to death, for example, with a fire extinguisher, and they're storming the Capitol. And then the moral equivalency is, well, here's a cop and a protester in Seattle pushing each other back and forth. Like, well, it's like, mm-hmm. okay, yeah, they're both at a protest, but you've drawn a moral equivalency as if both of those two things are about the same issues, that they're about, that the circumstances are all the same. Like, there's not a moral equivalence here. Like, yes, yep. An old lady ran over somebody at a stop sign, and yes, Joe Schmo was drunk and hit somebody. You can't be like, well, I mean, old ladies are going to get in cars, so why should we have drunk driving accidents? Like, wait a minute, you can't draw the moral equivalency between that old lady and that person who got in the car. Like, yes, death occurred in both instances, but there's nuance. There are levels to this game, you know? Yeah.
And people in general, like, I'm going to say, like, our population, like, awful. They're like awful at it's just like,
yeah. That's why they exist. It's because
I try to come from that place. I try to, like, always make comments that, like, are still sound with those. The Nirvana fallacy, where, oh my gosh, hold on one second, and decline. Okay, sorry. Hello. Yeah. Okay, my neighbor just tried calling me. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, the Nirvana fallacy, where, like, it's not worth doing unless it's perfect. You know, I could go mm-hmm. on and on mm-hmm. and on and on. What I wanted to say, though, I was just trying to mention that really quick. what I wanted to say is that with one of the things that you were asking about, like progress and things like that, do I think we've made progress? Yeah, I totally think we've actually made progress in terms of bringing some of the stuff out, like some of these things that, you know, some of the aggression towards other people, that maybe aggression, you know, aggression doesn't always mean I'm clubbing someone over the head. Aggression is the spectrum. And we've definitely made progress on that. I feel like, I think that a lot of one of the things I love about right now is that, especially with social media, actually, is that we've allowed vulnerability to come in. You know, I think it's really cool that we're actually allowing people to be vulnerable. And, you know, we've all seen these stories or these memes or all of these, you know, these things where people say, here's what happened to me, you know, basically, and it's kind of bringing a lot of the stuff out. And the vulnerability aspect is very cool, I think. And that's what I like about your constant honesty stuff. You know, if we're going to go back to music, I think that music that, for me, and this is totally my opinion, because I completely know that other people get things out of music that I don't get. You know, I'm not trying to say that my perception of music needs to be someone else's and that this is it.
No, it's yours.
So just understand that, okay? I like music that is fun for me to play and doesn't put me through an infinite amount of stress. And that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. It doesn't mean I like slacking off. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be a good player. It doesn't, you know, it's really easy to go to that place. Well, you just like playing stuff that's easy. Everything you play is diatonic. Like when you improvise, you must just play all diatonics, blah, blah. No, actually, I love improvising, and every day I work on it, and I'm trying to get better, and I've been working on it for many years. But I don't want to have my life consumed by music that stresses me out, or it's like, oh my God, I better get every single note perfect every single time, or oh my gosh. And I feel like there's a lot of that out there. And I hope that if there is music that does stress someone out a lot, I hope that they maybe are willing to take a different approach to it, you know?
Well, the constant honesty thing, thing, sorry to interrupt, Abby. I mean, the constant honesty thing is a complete defense mechanism. I mean, I hate criticism because I'm a very self-critical person. I think I'm literally the worst person in any room at any given time. Like, so like there's nobody in the room going to convince me that I'm worse than them, you know, like that's the thing, like that I'm not the hottest hot mess in that room. Like, and so for me, it was the constant honesty was just and also I did track a little bit in some of my students, this sort of like fear of like, and I think it stems a little bit from it can possibly stem from the orchestral sort of ideology and the drum corps a little bit, where, and I think the orchestral one has perhaps had more of an influence on people's mindsets around this stuff because, like, I don't know, like drum corps, you're in the same room with people for 3 months at a time. Orchestra auditions, you're not even getting in the room with those same people until you can play Porgy and Bess perfectly once at the drop of a hat whenever your name is called. Like that's a wholly different thing. And you know, I wish that drum corps, I wish there was like a constant honesty version of drum corps where like Brian Zader or, you know, I don't even like know the names in the drum corps that great, like Brian Rennick and like folks who are just like legit, who are the godfathers and godmothers of drum corps. Like they need to come out and be like, oh yeah, here's a video of me totally shitting the bed, like that sort of stuff. Like there's just a little less anxiety. And the orchestra world for me was that also getting a college teaching job was like, there's one way to do this, like there's a right way to do this. And so percussion, I feel like gave me the outlet to where like yes, I got to pay my bills. I can't walk out on stage and totally crap my pants on Mallet Quartet or Third Construction or Caroline Shaw. Like I can't do that. Yeah. But because I'm with you, I don't like music that overly taxes me and makes me stressed out. That's a lot of the music I happen to play.
But it doesn't mean that but it doesn't mean that we're slackers. It's like I want to have
No,
this is like a more of an emotional thing where it's like I want to be able to like actually thoroughly enjoy it. And for my personality, stuff that really stresses me out makes it hard for me to enjoy it. Other people they actually like being stressed.
Yeah.
You know, they want to go through those different methods, the orchestral methods of, I don't know, there was that one I saw where you like stack up the pennies and then I don't know, there's this whole thing and they like that. And that's their sport. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. If they want to do that and that makes them happy, totally fine. You know, like, that's not for me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean though that I'm not pushing myself every day to make progress in music. But I chose to not go into the straight ahead orchestral music world kind of for that reason. But I see a value in it. I absolutely see a value in it. I absolutely, you know, respect those players. It has nothing to do with that. It's just not the right fit for exactly me.
Well, I think
my personality.
Yeah, and maybe this
is three amigos.
Maybe this is my sort of like what I should do is take ownership and be like, well, maybe I should do some Constant Honesty podcasts with like Jim Baber and Joe Pereira and like sit down and talk with these guys who, you know, like one of the most telling things for me, we did the David Lang Concerto Man Made a couple of years ago in LA with Dudamel and the LA Phil, and we were the first half of the concert, intermission, Mahler 5. Like, what a crazy program, and like it was just an honor to even be on that program, right? Dudamel's conducting, and they rehearsed Man-Made enough to make it sound great. And it's like, you got to spend the rest of the week on Mahler 5 for Christ's sake, right? So they're in there going around. There's a big violin solo in one of the movements, and it's like the whole orchestra's like, whoa, and this violin comes in, right? So they're in the show. Like, we get done, we're feeling great, we're backstage, we're watching. Dudamel is like, blah, blah, blah. The violin soloist comes in like 2 bars early. And it's just sawing away. And Dudamel looks like, whoo, like snaps and look at him, gives him like the 1 minute finger, and is just like, boom, cues him again. And they walk off stage. I'm like, this is the concert master from the LA Phil.
Yeah.
And he walked, and he just was like, boo! And then he stopped and he was like, boo! Like, just played it again. And I walked off stage, and Dudamel was laughing hysterically. He just walked back, and the guy was like, I'm so sorry. And he's just like, that was awesome. You know, and they walked by.
Yeah.
Like, I'm half tempted to think that the French horn entrance in Beethoven 3, like that feels wrong, was like the French horn player came in the right place but was wrong, and Beethoven was like, oh no, we got to keep that. That was way cooler, you know, like that would make more sense to me as a musician.
Right. But I mean, this is why people are going to see humans playing live music, because there is an acrobatic thing of pulling something off live versus I'm going to go see a bunch of robots play music. Right? Because it's way more thrilling to have like some soul in there. Not only the soul of the people like playing, but the soul of praising, and the little bit of, you know, playing just a little bit out of tune can actually make it sound fuller. And I mean, there's a reason why we haven't just converted over to like, you know, animatronic like concerts. There's a reason.
The Chuck E. Cheese model, as they say.
I dig it. I dig it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it when stuff goes wrong. I'm serious.
No, like, I do. Well, I make a living off of it now. I mean, I rely heavily on things going wrong. You know, going wrong usually, I mean, yes, it can also mean you don't know what you're doing. That you haven't practiced.
Yeah.
There's a sort of line you walk of like, oh, you just need to practice.
Bell curve. It's certainly a bell curve.
Yeah, you need to go pick up some sticks and move your hands around a bit, son. I think that's what you got to do. But yeah, I mean, I think this sort of, and I as you were talking about, you know, your passions. I see the way that you and Dan treat. Like, it's a little bit like the Mahler sort of, or the Wagner Gazan. Like, everything is important. The hall you're playing is important. Who we have putting mics on the instruments is important. George Crumb's music would not have sounded like it sounded when we did it in California, if Dan had not, and you had not organized that gear to come up. Like, there's an important role you play, and I think in terms of advocacy and education, like, I think it was good that timpanist just to sort of wrap up here, like, I think it was good that timpanist had his feet. I was glad to see that, because it actually sort of pulled open a portal to our field that was like, you know, a lot of my students are now like, I can make money renting timpani to the NFL. Like, that never even crossed anybody's mind that would be something they could do. You know, not that that's what you wake up every day being like, I can't wait till they call again. But like,
yeah,
it's part of it. And you serve the NFL. You also serve So Percussion. And I just want to say, like, I've stolen almost exactly an hour of your life, Abby. And
it's all good.
I want you to relay to Dan that while he's lovely, you are way more enjoyable to chat with.
That's awkward. You can relay that to him.
Nope, you're married to him.
Go ahead and tag him with that.
You're married to him. In the coronavirus times, I'm operating under the "you touched him last" rule, and you touched Dan last, you got to tell him.
Yeah, I mean, if I could make like a parting comment.
Yeah, sure.
About the soul and humans playing music, you know, in percussion, you know, listen, some of percussion and percussionists are getting replaced by samples. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's happening in some of the recorded stuff. What I would encourage is for percussionists to keep going with the development of the art form, keep going with the finding of different sounds, because it is not over for these acoustic instruments. Mm-hmm. You know, the digital world is going nuts. I mean, I'm on a whole bunch of different composer groups, and I work with some composers, you know, film composers and stuff. And oops, hold on one second. Hold on.
You're good.
My
Is Dan calling
hold
you?
On.
Tell Dan you're working.
No, it's like someone like messaged me. Actually, one of the composer people I'm working with messaged me on Facebook, and the whole screen blew. So anyway, sorry about that.
Right.
That completely ruined my vibe, but hey, whatever. There's that soul again of things getting messed up.
Keep exploring and developing the art form is where you left off, I believe.
Yeah, so you keeps developing the art form. And when it comes to the digital side, like I was saying, I work with like a number of composers or whatever, and the digital side is going crazy. There's just so much development. And I can tell you that we've done a lot of, you know, I've played for a lot of composers. We've done a lot of workshopping, and we've done a lot of sound exploration, and there is so much to be done. And essentially, if you want to keep that soul in the music and you want to keep being relevant, it's really important to keep developing the field. So go ahead and, you know, hack away. Like I was, you know, you want to hack away at Porgy for 10 hours, great. But also I think it's important for the percussion field and percussionists to kind of keep developing, you know, the actual art form, because it will be relevant. It will stay relevant in not just percussion world, because it's important that we're not just relevant in percussionist to percussionist, but we're actually relevant in the music world and then media and art, and, you know, the whole thing. So I think it's all important, actually.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's an amazing place to sort of like put a button on this. And listen, this is not the last time you and I will ever chat. My door is always open. If there's anything else you want to, you know, another occasion pops up, just message me. You know where to find me. This wasn't that hard.
Sounds cool.
Me scheduling it was the hardest part, and I think once I finally opened my date book, it was like, let's do this, like, so that, like, just don't hesitate. But where can folks find out, like, if there's a young percussionist coming up or a composer who's psyched about sort of like, you have one of the world's largest collections of just weird percussion instruments in general, but also Emil Richards' personal collection. You have a lot of that. If a composer wanted to learn about, like, wait a minute, you were doing a thing with composers, where should they look? I know LA Percussion, like, what's the website? Where can folks find out about what you're doing?
I mean, any of the LA Percussion Rentals social media would be a good start. And then I also have another page that I started called 20-Second Perk, which is essentially a place where I kind of just started it actually not that long ago, but it's been pretty cool so far. Basically, it's a place where composers will submit something they're working on. They want to hear it for real, trying to work out logistics, whatever. And I have some social media for that. So it's called 20-Second Perk, basically. Awesome. I think that's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, and there's a website. So that's kind of where I'm posting a lot of this kind of stuff right now.
Okay. That's awesome. I'll check out the 20-Second Perk thing. That sounds like an amazing sort of like infrastructure for compose. Like, is it that they have to submit like 20-second long chunks and that you'll try it out and send it back to them?
Yeah. And sometimes before I actually do it, I'll give them notes like, so that's not going to happen at like 160 BPM. on this instrument per se, unless you really want them to have to bring it home and shed it for 10 hours. But if you actually want someone to pull
there's
this
a
off.
whole market economy here, like an offshoot of like, I'll just try out your stuff and send it back to you. Like, there's no strings attached. Like, you pay me $10,
Yeah.
I'll record these 20 bars for you and send it back to you. Like, just so you. All right, now you're getting my juices flowing here, Abby. This is. Listen, Papa's got to eat, Like, well, I'll cut you in. I'll cut you in on this. But I'm just kidding. That sounds awesome. I'll check it out. I think that's a really amazing idea, and I think it would be a great resource for composers. But listen, all joking aside, tell Dan I love him, and go get that tattoo done. I think you're onto something there.
Take care.
So see you, Abby.
Thanks.
Take it easy. Bye.
Good to talk to you.
Likewise.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on, in percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner, builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandro Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.